Victor Maroni was untouchable. As the reigning Mafia King of the city's most powerful syndicate, he had spent the last decade expanding his territory, lining the pockets of politicians, and crushing his enemies. But heavy is the head that wears the crown, and a secret war with a foreign cartel had quietly pushed Victor's empire to the brink of bankruptcy and total annihilation. Desperate to maintain his illusion of supreme power, Victor made an unforgivable choice. Without consulting his father, Don Salvatore, or his fiercely loyal wife, Elena, Victor brokered a secret peace treaty in the shadows. The price? He traded the names, locations, and schedules of his father's oldest, most loyal capos to the cartel. He offered them up as sacrificial lambs to save his own seat at the head of the table. To sweeten the deal, he signed away the rights to the docks, a territory legally held in Elena's name, putting her directly in the crosshairs of federal indictments to take the fall if the feds ever came knocking. He thought he was being a visionary. He thought the family would eventually understand that a few lives and some legal risks were worth preserving the kingdom. He was wrong. The truth didn't come out in a grand confrontation. It unspooled quietly when Silas, the calculating consigliere, intercepted a wire transfer from the cartel and presented the paper trail directly to Elena and Don Salvatore. The betrayal fractured the family instantly. Elena didn't weep. She felt a cold, terrifying clarity. The man she loved had turned her into collateral damage. Don Salvatore looked at his son not as a king, but as a traitor who had broken the sacred oath of omerta. What happened next shocked the entire underworld. They didn't assassinate Victor. A bullet to the head would have been a mercy, and Don Salvatore didn't believe in mercy for traitors. Instead, Elena, Salvatore, and Silas orchestrated a silent, bloodless coup. Over the course of 48 hours, they systematically froze Victor out of his own life. They transferred the family funds, redirected the loyalties of the street soldiers, and fed Victor's secret treaty documents to the rival cartel, framing Victor as an informant trying to play both sides. When Victor finally called a meeting to assert his dominance, he walked into a completely empty boardroom. His empire was gone. His family had vanished into the shadows, leaving him alone, bankrupt, and with a target on his back from every syndicate in the city. The Mafia King wasn't killed. He was left to survive in a world where his name no longer commanded fear, but actively invited a bounty. The air in the Maroni boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cedar and the metallic tang of a storm brewing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victor sat at the head of the mahogany table, his hands folded, the gold signet ring on his pinky catching the dim light. He looked every bit the Mafia King, composed, dominant, and ready to receive the fealty of his captains. He checked his watch. 8:05 p.m. They were 5 minutes late. In the Maroni family, 5 minutes was a lifetime. It was a message. "Leo," Victor said, his voice a low gravel that vibrated against the walls. In the bottom corner of the room, Leo Maroni shifted, his face pale and eyes darting toward the heavy double doors. He looked fearful, his collar suddenly feeling 2 sizes too small. "Maybe the rain, Vic? The bridge is backed up." Victor didn't look at his brother. His eyes remained fixed on the empty chairs. "The bridge doesn't stop a capo from answering a summons. Silas, where is my consigliere?" From the shadows near the bar, Silas Vance stepped forward. He didn't look flustered. In fact, he looked entirely too calm, his expression calculating as he adjusted his glasses. "The Don is with your father, Victor. And Elena, she said she had an appointment she couldn't miss." Victor finally turned his head, a slow, predatory movement. "An appointment? On the night of the Treaty Council?" "She was very specific," Silas added, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "She said some debts are best settled in person." Victor felt the first prickle of unease. It wasn't a physical threat, not yet, but a shift in the atmosphere he had controlled for a decade. He stood up, the chair legs scraping harshly against the marble floor. "Call them again," Victor commanded. "I'm afraid the lines are down, Victor," a new voice boomed. The doors swung open, but it wasn't the loyal soldiers Victor expected. It was Don Salvatore. The old man walked with a cane, but his posture was as stern and authoritative as a judge delivering a death sentence. Behind him stood Elena. She didn't look like the doting wife who had kissed him goodbye that morning. Her expression was one of cold, sharpened anger. She wore a black trench coat, her eyes like flint. She didn't look at the chair next to Victor. She stood behind Salvatore, a united front. "Father," Victor said, trying to reclaim the room. "You're late. We have a treaty to sign. The cartel is waiting for the coordinates." "The cartel is dead, Victor," Don Salvatore said, his voice echoing with the weight of 40 years of rule. "And so is your treaty." The twist, the silent coup. Victor laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "What are you talking about? I saved this family. I brokered the deal that keeps our heads on our shoulders." "You sold my men," Elena said, her voice cutting through his bravado like a razor. "You traded the names of the men who bled for you so you could keep your throne. And you signed away my inheritance to cover your tracks." Victor stepped toward her, his face darkening. "I did what a king has to do, Elena. I made a choice." "And we made ours," she replied. Silas stepped away from the bar and placed a thick folder on the table. It wasn't the treaty. It was a record of every offshore account Victor had used to facilitate the betrayal. "The soldiers don't take orders from a man who sells his own blood," Salvatore whispered. "As of 10 minutes ago, the Maroni assets have been moved. The safe houses are empty. The guards outside? They aren't yours anymore, Victor." Victor lunged for the intercom on the table, his hand trembling with a sudden, frantic energy. He hit the button to the security desk. "Security! Get in here! Now!" Silence. Then, a crackle of static, and a voice Victor didn't recognize. "The king is dead. Long live the queen." The consequence. Victor looked at Elena. For the first time in his life, the man at the center of the thumbnail felt small. The low-angle dominance was gone. He was surrounded by the people he had betrayed, and they weren't reaching for guns. They were reaching for the door. "What happened next shocked everyone," Silas whispered, leaning in close to Victor's ear. "Because we aren't going to kill you, Victor. That's too easy. We're leaving you here, in this empty building, with no money, no men, and the cartel's survivors on their way to find the man who set them up." Elena stepped forward, leaning over the table until she was inches from his face. The pain from the thumbnail had been replaced by a terrifying, icy satisfaction. "You betrayed your family," she whispered. "Now, watch what happens when the family betrays you back." They turned and walked out, the heavy doors thudding shut, leaving the Mafia King alone in the golden glow of a dying empire. The breach of the golden cage. The air in the boardroom turned to ice. The heavy double doors didn't just open, they groaned as the electronic locks were fried from the outside, the smell of burnt copper filling the room. Victor stood behind his mahogany desk, his hand reaching for the drawer where he kept his custom .45, but the drawer wouldn't budge. Silas had even locked the desk. The Valdez cartel soldiers stepped in, 4 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by ballistic masks. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. They moved with the professional silence of a cleanup crew. In the center stood Mateo Valdez, the calculating heir to the cartel Victor had tried to sell out. He pulled off his mask, revealing a face mapped with scars and a cold, predatory smile. "Victor," Mateo said, his voice a smooth contrast to the chaos. "I hear you're having a clearance sale on family secrets, but I think you overcharged me." Victor held his head high, trying to summon the dominance from the thumbnail one last time. Matteo, you're early. My consigliere has the transfer codes. We can settle this right now. Matteo laughed, stepping closer until he was leaning on the very table where the Maroni family had sat just 20 minutes prior. Your consigliere? You mean the man who just sent me a GPS ping to this room and a digital receipt for $30 million? Signed by your wife? Victor's heart skipped. Elena? She's a businesswoman, Victor, Matteo said, pulling a gold-plated dagger from his belt, the very visual element from your title text, and driving it into the wood of the table. She paid your debt, every cent, but there was a condition. Victor felt the walls closing in. What condition? She paid for your life, Matteo whispered, but she didn't pay for your freedom. The shocking transition. Suddenly, the lights in the boardroom flickered and turned a deep, burnt gold. The monitors on the wall sparked back to life, showing a live feed from the Maroni family's private docks. The image was crystal clear, photorealistic, and high contrast. Elena stood in the center of the frame, flanked by Don Salvatore and a line of black-clad soldiers. Behind them, a massive cargo ship was being loaded. Victor, Elena's voice came through the boardroom speakers, amplified and echoing. The king always pays. You thought you were the only one who could make a deal? I traded your throne for a global partnership. The Valdez cartel is no longer our enemy. They are our logistics providers. Victor looked at Matteo. The cartel leader nodded. The war Victor had feared was over, but he had been the currency used to buy the peace. What happened next shocked everyone wasn't a headline. It was the reality of the Maroni shift. Elena wasn't just taking over, she was evolving. Take him, Matteo signaled to his men. They grabbed Victor by the arms. The man who was once the Mafia King was dragged toward the service elevator. He looked back at the boardroom one last time, at the dark vignette edges of the room that seemed to swallow his shadow whole. On the screen, Elena turned away from the camera, walking toward the head of the new table being set at the docks. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The story had moved on. The betrayal was complete, and the reckoning had found its target. His reign ends. Her empire begins. The Queen's first decree. The scene shifts from the cold, industrial docks to the Maroni ancestral estate. The lighting is no longer the frantic, flickering amber of the boardroom. It is a steady, deep, burnt gold, illuminating the portraits of 5 generations of men who thought they were invincible. Elena Maroni stands at the head of the long dining table. She has removed her trench coat, revealing a sharp, charcoal-gray suit. She looks at the silence in the boardroom was louder than any gunshot. Victor stood motionless at the head of the table, his reflection caught in the polished mahogany. A king with no kingdom. The amber glow from the recessed lighting, once a symbol of his golden era, now felt like the heat of a furnace. He grabbed his smartphone. No signal. He tried the landline. Dead. He rushed to the heavy oak doors and pulled. Locked from the outside. The electronic maglock hummed with a mocking, steady vibration. Silas had programmed the security suite. Silas had built the cage. Elena! Victor roared, slamming his fist against the wood. Elena, open this door! From the other side there was no response, only the faint, receding click of heels on marble. The arrival of the consequences. 10 minutes passed. Victor paced the length of the room like a caged tiger. He looked at the full HD security monitor on the wall. Usually, it displayed 16 feeds of his sprawling estate. Now, it showed only one, the main gate. A black SUV drifted into the frame. Then another. No headlights. These weren't Maroni vehicles. These were the heavy, armored Suburbans of the Valdez cartel, the very men Victor had tried to double-cross. He realized with a jolt of pure ice in his veins that Silas hadn't just stripped him of his power. He had left the front door open for the executioners. "Leo, if you're listening to this on the comms, help me," Victor pleaded to the empty room, looking toward the hidden microphones. In the security hub 3 floors below, Leo Maroni watched the screen, his face twisted in a mask of fear and conflict. He reached for the override switch to unlock the boardroom door, but a firm, manicured hand landed on his wrist. Elena stood over him, her silhouette sharp against the glowing monitors. "Don't," she said softly. "He traded your life for a percentage of the docks, Leo. Remember that when you feel the urge to be a brother." Leo looked at the screen, then at his sister-in-law. He slowly pulled his hand away. On the boardroom monitor, Victor watched the cartel soldiers exit their vehicles. They weren't rushing. They knew he had nowhere to go. They carried suppressed submachine guns and a heavy sledgehammer for the doors. Victor turned back to the mahogany table. He saw the gold metallic serif font of the family ledger lying open. Under his own signature, someone had stamped a single word in red ink. Void. Suddenly, the monitors flickered. Elena's face replaced the gate feed. She was sitting in the back of a moving car, the city lights blurring behind her. "The king pays, Victor," she said, her voice calm and devoid of the pain he had seen earlier that morning. "The cartel thinks you have the money. We both know you don't. You gave it to Silas to hide, and Silas gave it to me." "Elena, please," Victor whispered, dropping his persona. "I did it for us." "You did it for the crown," she corrected. "And now you can wear it into the ground. What happens next? Well, I've already leaked the footage of your treaty to the remaining capos. By dawn, your name will be a curse word in every corner of this city." The sound of the heavy sledgehammer hitting the building's reinforced glass entrance echoed up through the vents. Crack! Victor looked at the window. It was a 40-story drop. He looked at the door. The cartel was coming. But then he noticed something in the bottom third of the security screen. A small, full HD badge flashed in the corner of the monitor, indicating a live broadcast. Silas wasn't just recording this. He was streaming the downfall of the Mafia King to the entire underworld dark web. The shock that the title promised wasn't just Victor's death. It was his public humiliation. The world was watching the untouchable king beg. As the boardroom doors began to groan under the pressure of the cartel's breaching charges, Victor realized the ultimate truth. In the world of the mafia, you are only a king as long as someone is willing to follow you. And Victor was completely, utterly alone.
Leo Maroni, the witness, he sits at the far end, still visibly shaken. He is no longer the runt of the family. Elena has placed him in charge of internal audits, a polite term for making sure no one else develops Victor's appetite for secret treaties. The transition is complete, Elena says, her voice echoing with a film-quality realism that commands the room. The Valdez cartel has received the first shipment. In exchange, they have handed over the keys to the northern transit routes. Routes Victor never knew existed because he was too busy looking at his own reflection. She slides a single piece of paper across the table to Silas. The first order of business, Victor's golden prison. He is currently being held in the sub-level suite of the Santorini villa. It's photorealistic luxury, marble floors, silk sheets, the finest wine. But the windows are reinforced glass, and the doors only open from the outside. How long do we keep him there? Leo asks, his voice trembling slightly. Elena looks at him, her eyes as cold as the dark vignette edges of a noir film. Until he understands that a king is nothing without the people he steps on. He will live in total luxury and total silence. No news. No internet. No family. He will be a ghost in a gold cage. The shocking final act. And the public? Salvatore asks. The streets are talking. They saw the Mafia King fall on the live stream. Elena leans forward into the dramatic high-contrast rim lighting. Let them talk. We aren't going to hide it. We are going to lean into it. Silas, release the full footage of the boardroom breach. I want every rival in this city to see exactly what happens when you prioritize your ego over your blood. The final shot of the chapter isn't of Elena. It's a split screen. On the left, Victor is seen through a security camera in his villa, screaming at a silent wall, surrounded by gold and marble he can't use. On the right, Elena walks out onto the balcony of the estate, overlooking the city she now quietly owns. The screen fades to black as the Full HD badge in the corner blinks out. Betrayal has a price. Power has a new name. Empty chair at the far end, Victor's chair. With a slight nod to the house staff, she watches as they physically remove the heavy oak seat from the room. There will be no king at this table. Only a chairperson. Seated around her are the remains of the broken family, now being restitched into something stronger. Don Salvatore, the authority. He sits to her right. He isn't leading, but his presence provides the legitimacy she needs to keep the old guard capos from revolting. He looks at Elena with a mixture of grief for his son and grim respect for her ruthlessness. Silas Vance, the architect. He sits to her left, his laptop open, already rerouting the last of Victor's hidden offshore accounts into a family legacy fund. His calculating face is lit by the blue glow of the screen.